Okay guys, so we are here right now. I see I'm going to be using a different camera setup. It's an iPhone camera with an app called Movie Pro. And we're at the museum right now. We're at the entrance of the museum. We got debriefed on what we can and can't do. Pretty much take all the video that I want, all the pictures that I want. I was able to also secure a headset, which is going to give me a guided tour. So the idea is that as I'm hearing it on the headset, you guys are going to be hearing it, and I'm going to do the video. I'm not going to do this live, so I can try to edit as much as I can. I'll probably do a piece or two live here and there, but we'll see how we can get this squared away. So let's start the tour. So I'm going to flip the camera now so you guys can watch on the other end. My battery's also running low, which sucks. So there's the audio.
Boys and girls, we have Mr. Bill Davidson going to introduce us to his family.
My family.
All right. So who do we have here?
So this is my great-grandfather, William A. This is their good friend, Bill Harley. This is my great-uncle, Walter. And this is my other uncle, Arthur.
Wow. These are the original
So
founders.
Three Davidsons and Bill Harley.
Wow.
And this photo was taken in 1912 in front of our original headquarters, or the original birthplace, I should say.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Davidson. And here we go, guys. And we have the family here, and we're going to get some nice insider stories in a little while. Stay tuned.
Factory on Juneau Avenue, and we found all kinds of blueprints of the original floor plans and expansions.
So found that means that they were stored and nobody ever managed to keep them?
Yeah, we never really knew they existed.
Okay.
And we found them, and it's just staggering. Here's a perfect example. They're building the foundation for some expansion at Juneau Avenue. And you've got a steam-powered steam shovel. You've got a horse and buggy taking the dirt out. It's just staggering to me, the history and the founders, when they were going through this expansion from roughly 1910 to the mid-20s, the company was growing at a very fast rate. Volumes were increasing significantly. So they had to figure out their game plan to never shut down manufacturing and at the same time expand manufacturing. So there's pictures where, let's see if I can find something.
Yeah, they look great.
So this is a perfect example. They had built this, then they had built this, and then they're building in the center. So it was a
Modular
big puzzle
approach. Yeah.
as to, hey, we got to keep producing motorcycles,
But we can't stop what we're doing.
but we don't have enough space. We can't stop what we're doing. How are we going to do this?
Yeah, modular approach.
Yeah, pretty neat.
Yeah. Luckily, at that time, land was available.
Yes.
In today's days,
Yes.
if you want to expand the factory, you got to go outside the city limits.
There's an interesting story. So my grandfather was president of the company from 1942 to 72. And he's the gentleman that bought the property where our engine plant used to be in Milwaukee off of Capitol Drive.
Okay.
And when he purchased that plant, he purchased additional land. And that additional land is where our product development center sits today.
Okay. The PDC.
So it's kind of a neat story.
Wow. So.
I didn't know that story.
Really?
I didn't know you purchased
So-
it.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. Because he said, if we have this opportunity now, we should do it because of the potential of expansion.
Sure.
And that property was also where we had a test trail for the snowmobiles.
Is that
74, 75. Yeah.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And in fact, I rode the MT500, our dirt bike,
Uh-huh.
with retired Vice President of Engineering Mark Tuttle. He and I test rode those bikes on that snowmobile trail.
Is
in
that
the
right?
woods. Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. That's wild.
Some of these old factory shots are just, it's just amazing. You know, the handwork, it blows my mind. You could spend years just studying the history of manufacturing over 117 years, and pretty neat story.
Bill, are we doing our own, like, do we have our own foundry or anything, or do you know any about that?
We did some, but not too much. And that's, you know, I often say, well, how did they ever decide to land in Milwaukee? You know, why here? Because they came over from Europe, obviously, Scotland,
Yeah.
and ended up in Milwaukee. But it was, when you think of the brewery industry and all the technology and the engineering, the Canal Street, that was like a machine shop of the world. Tremendous amount of technology. Falk Foundry, that goes back to the 1800s. They started as a brewery, Falk Brewery. And they're still on the south shore of the Menominee River, up in the woods. You can still see where that brewery was. It's pretty run down, but I always thought, gosh, wouldn't that be cool to buy that? Bring that Falk Brewery back.
Yeah, no kidding.
But so they were surrounded by talent.
Yeah.
You know, they were friends with Ali Evinrude.
Yep.
Gettleman Brewery they were really good friends with Mr. Gettleman. In fact, there's a really cool story that on the top of Juneau Avenue, there were some flagpoles. And if we had a good production day, they would go up there and raise a flag. The flag was visible at Gettleman Brewery. And Bob Gettleman would say, guys, the boys at Harley had a great day of production. We gotta go deliver a quarter barrel of beer for them. They
Get 'em-
put a
get
quarter
'em
barrel
drunk.
on the back of a wagon, horse and buggy, bring it to Juneau Avenue in the courtyard, tap it up, and they'd celebrate.
That's awesome.
We need to bring that back.
Yeah, that's incredible.
I love that story.
Imagine the chaos, dirt, and noise stirred up by 50 motorcycles going cross-country through swamps and thick woods for 2 days straight, stopping only for sleep over 500 miles. There is such a race, and it's called the Jack Pine Enduro. This 1946 WLA was modified for the Jack Pine, including a paddle-type rear tire added for traction in the mud. Bruce Walters, son of a Harley Davidson dealer, probably raced this bike in the 1950s. The race has been happening since 1920 in Lansing, Michigan, and in the early days, Harley Davidson motorcycles dominated. William H. Davidson, son of the founder, won the Jack Pine in 1930. One account from that date recalled,
"The run got off at 6 a.m., August 31st, and right from the city limits, the course was a He-Man's battle, with loose gravel and gumbo into the first check at Carlin. 6 riders had dropped by the wayside at Carlin, and the worst was yet to come. It got worse in the afternoon, with rutted roads and holes filled with water. After that came fine white sand over a section 40 miles in length, and roads so crooked you didn't see the fellow 50 feet ahead."
Legends of the Jack Pine also include Harley Davidson dealers Oscar Lenz, who championed the event from the start and rode to victory himself 14 times, and Dot Robinson. You can find a picture of Dot in action in this case. She was one of the only women to compete in the event. She also co-founded the Motor Maids, the oldest motorcycling organization for women in North America. Linda Dugo co-founded the Motor Maids along with Dot Robinson in 1940. Linda started a letter writing campaign 2 years earlier to encourage other female riders to join together to start a motorcycle club. In the case behind you, you'll see Motormaid's memorabilia, including a banner, a uniform, and several photographs. To be eligible to join the Motormaids, a girl was required to prove that she owned and drove her own motorcycle. The rules stipulated that ability to drive only qualified a woman for membership. Riding on the back with someone else or in the sidecar does not qualify a girl for membership. The club's charter membership included 51 women from 19 states. It wasn't all for fun. After all, this was the midst of World War II. Many of the members were volunteers for civilian defense. They ran blackout patrols and were ready to volunteer for dispatch riding if the war were to spread to American shores. Their charter stated that they were ready to do anything else wherein their talents may be of use. The group gained an AMA charter in 1941. Imagine racing motorcycles at top speed on a bunch of 2x4s. Believe it or not, motordrome or board track racing was just that.
Those tires were only about 1.5 inches wide.
Don Tilley is a Harley Davidson dealer in Statesville, North Carolina. The tires on these bikes were specifically designed for the track. Motordrome conditions were tough, track wood was often oily, and when damaged, it threatened life and limb. Speeds topped 100 miles an hour.
I tell you, those guys that rode those things had to be Iron Men because there was no suspension other than a little bit of spring on the seat. And they had some kind of a tube spring fork on them, which wasn't much.
Official Harley-Davidson factory racers such as Otto Walker and Leslie Red Parkhurst were up to the challenge, taking on the tracks at Sheepshead Bay, New York, Playa del Rey, California, and of course right here in Milwaukee. Believe it or not, a board track was located where present-day Hubbard Park stands on the Milwaukee-Shorewood border. Directly behind you on the platform, you'll see a 1923 Model 17 Banjo Case 8-valve racer, one of the rarest and most valuable American racers in existence. Less than 20 were made. Early race bikes are extremely rare for many reasons. Many racers were destroyed in crashes or raced until they were used up, and as few as a dozen of some models were produced. A few engines have survived in the hands of privateer racers after being separated from their chassis and have made their way into the hands of various collectors around the world, while some others were probably discarded during scrap drives during World War II. In the end, several of the bikes in this gallery are the only surviving examples. Be sure not to miss more artifacts from the board track racing era, located behind the board track.
Since coming overseas, I've seen how Harley Davidson can stand up under all kinds of impossible conditions. I've ridden your military Model 45 through many miles of swamp and jungle. Have seen them under enemy shell fire, and not once have they failed to complete their missions. You can be sure that when the post-war Harley Davidsons roll off the line, I'll be first in line.
When the United States entered World War II in December of 1941, Harley Davidson was already producing a motorcycle for the military on the average of one every 5 minutes. In order to keep up with the mountain of orders, the motor company opened their doors to married women for the first time. These Rosie the Riveters operated drill presses, lathes, and other light machinery, keeping the war effort rolling. Wartime models were built in all shapes and sizes and were used on almost all fronts, like the 1942 model with the mounted Thompson submachine gun reproduction you see here. A close variant of the WLA was produced for the Canadian Army, and smaller numbers were made for England, South Africa, and other allies. 30,000 WLAs were used by the Russian Army in its advance toward Berlin. Harley-Davidson was eventually awarded 3 prestigious Army-Navy E Awards for exceptional performance in the production of war materials, an award given to less than 2% of American factories making war products. To get a better idea of Harley-Davidson's role in World War II, you can take your headphones off and watch the video in this gallery.
Hollywood's most famous movie stars leave the film capital to help the government sell war bonds. This is the people's way of saying, From the home front to the battlefront, from movie stars to sales clerks, America's 130 million citizens are in the war.
I cannot tell you when or where the United Nations are going to strike next in Europe, but we are going to strike and strike hard.
In the West, Great Britain and the United States marshaled the greatest military armada in history, threw it across the English Channel, and charged the western defenses of Hitler's fortress Europe to liberate the nations under the aggressor's yoke. Germany was beaten, and Americans and Russians joined hands in celebration of victory.
One only has to visit the plant and see the genuine smile of satisfaction that spreads over the faces of the Big Four in the Milwaukee Works to be convinced that in this new twin, they have something that can be regarded as a real achievement.
The four founding fathers and the rest of the motor company were all smiles when they introduced this beauty. The 1929 DL was raced into production to compete with the popular new Indian Scout, and it succeeded in spades. Many of the bikes in the collection look like they rolled straight off the assembly line, and they did, but not this one. You might notice that it looks like it's been around the block a few times. Harley Davidson conservator Bill Rodensel explains how the museum cares for bikes like this one.
A lot of the bikes that people will see in this museum will look like, boy, those hand grips are kind of beat up and everything, but that's, they're the original grips, and we try and maintain that integrity. We'll come across certain bikes that'll fill a hole, but they've been restored 10 times before they get to us. So then what we have to do is, assess the bike, what's missing, what components are incorrect, secure the correct components, and then basically strip it down completely and do a complete restoration. Now, what's nice about having the Harley Davidson archives one door away is you can get original factory photos, engineering documents. We have access to all those materials, which is, the average restorer doesn't have that. This collection is so unique. There's nothing like it anywhere in the world.
The A and B series motorcycles of 1926, like this one, were touted for their exceptional gas mileage and sporty performance. The motorcyclist of the 20s was free to explore America's miles of unpaved roads. Notice the frame-mounted leather tool bag just behind the seat. Enthusiastic about new modern technology and eager for backroad adventure, the Harley-Davidson owner was hands-on out of necessity and the pure pleasure of getting to know the machine.
In the early days of riding, not only were you a rider, but you were very familiar with your machine.
Steve Magnatta is not only an avid collector of Harley-Davidson motorcycles, but accessories and memorabilia as well.
And you were its mechanic. So, there weren't many paved roads back then. They were mostly washboard dirt roads, and if you experienced a flat tire, you changed it yourself. So in your toolbox, you carried some tire spoons, a hot patch.
Accessories of the time were utilitarian, emphasizing function, not flash. The company watched sales of these practical tools increase as enthusiasts jumped at each new offering that promised to keep their beloved bikes on the road. Women began riding in the earliest days of the motorcycle. Take Effie and Avis Hotchkiss, the mother-daughter duo who rode from Brooklyn, New York to San Francisco on an 11J just like this one, with a sidecar not unlike the one you'll see to your left. They were the first female riders to make a cross-country journey, though to hear Effie tell the tale, it was no big deal. Back home in New York, Effie worked in an office on Wall Street, but she seemed to take to the open road very well. At one point in their journey, coming through San Marcos Pass, her mother recounted that they braved 120-degree heat while navigating their sidecar through numerous detours around torn-up roads. At another point in their journey, after blowing a tire, Effie needed to get to a town to find a replacement inner tube. She left her mother to guard the bike out in the desert for 2 days and nights without food, armed with an automatic pistol she didn't know how to use. Both women later described such adventures as just part of the fun. A man they met along the way said that Effie was the bravest girl driver he had ever met, a remark she dismissed with a wave of the hand. A reporter at the time explained, "Miss Hotchkiss is a bit headstrong. As to that, it should be stated she is a typical American girl of the type that loves the outdoors. She believes that a girl can do everything that a boy can do, and further, she does it." Today, there are about 4 million miles of paved road traversing the United States. But at the turn of the 20th century, you might be surprised to know that only 150 miles were paved, and those were mostly in large cities. The motorcycles of the time weren't made for the kind of cruising we do today. They were intended to help the rider get around on rough, bumpy dirt roads. Here, you see the 1912 X8A single, with what was billed as a longer travel, full floating seat. The new frame allowed the seat to move up and down and created a more comfortable ride. That was even more important because these were also the days before rear-wheel suspension.
In the early years, we started out as a company that provided transportation. Because in 2003, we were just coming off of really the horse and buggy and the steam locomotive as basic means of travel.
Willy G. Davidson.
So the early motorcycles were a functional product that was really transportation. And as we grew in size, these vehicles became an additional method of transportation, additional to the automobile. Of course, everybody then switched from an open vehicle, such as a motorcycle, to an automobile. So at that time, we started to become a sport or hobby.
With 20th century progress came 20th century risks. A 1912 New York Times article recounts a crash between an airplane and a motorcycle, what they called one of the most novel accidents of the year. In November 1911, Joe Moulter of Chicago had just won his third motorcycle race of the day in Oakland, California. As he crossed the finish line and cut his motor, a small plane swooped down over the track and crashed into the rear of his bike, knocking him to the ground. The New York Times reporter wrote, "Machines and men went down in a heap." The pilot of the small plane dusted himself off, repaired the damaged wing of his plane, and was back up in the air that very afternoon. Joe Moulter was reportedly dazed but undaunted and managed to hop back on his bike by the very next day. During the 1940s, Harley Davidson factories were almost completely dedicated to the war effort, sending the vast majorities of the bikes they produced abroad to serve the military. When the war ended, the company had to refocus on consumers at home. Racing presented a great opportunity to promote civilian sales with bikes like this 1946 WR model. Built off of the W Series street motorcycles, the WR is one of the most successful dirt track racing motorcycles in history.
June 1st, 1947. Another championship for Harley Davidson, stock. Leo Anthony wins 10-mile national for half-mile tracks, stock. Jimmy Chan second, Billy Huber third, Buck Briggins fourth, all Harley Davidson.
In the 1950 race season alone, Harley Davidson riders won 18 of 24 national championships on WRs. Ray Texter started working for the motor company in 1943.
My favorite, I like the dirt tracks. To see a mile dirt track like at Springfield, I've been going there ever since 1946, and I said it still gives you the chills to you know, watch them come out of the corner and down the straightaways. They run 140 mile an hour in the dirt.
The number 10 you see here is a recreation of the bike Madison, Wisconsin dealer Ray Tursky rode in his dirt track racing days. By the 1920s, Harley Davidson employed more than 2,000 people at its Milwaukee plant. But with the Great Depression, the motor company was hit hard. In its aftermath, the company adopted a new strategy, epitomized by this 1937 UH 80-inch twin. The new Harley Davidson motorcycle promised better handling, safety, and operating efficiency, among other enhancements. One place you can see that is in the double down tube frame going from the handlebars to the wheel. The double tube created a stronger, safer frame. Ads emphasized the low cost of motorcycle transportation, perhaps a nod to the trials of the Depression. By the 1930s, the primary use for motorcycles was no longer everyday transportation. Automobiles had taken the lead. Harley Davidson Motor Company decided the greatest opportunities were in the recreational field and in providing motorcycles for police and commercial use. Harley Davidson began to ramp up production again, hiring back workers who had been laid off during the lean years. Employees formed a new union, Local 209, part of the United Auto Workers, and negotiated their first contract. Wages rose, and employees gained benefits like paid vacation. Sales increased to nearly 12,000 motorcycles that year, a sign of economic expansion to come. Soon, the advent of World War II would lead to even greater demand for reliable, high-performance motorcycles for the military. It was the dawn of a new era for the company and for the country at large.
The 74 Twin was designed as a solo motorcycle that could be paired equally well with a state-of-the-art streamlined sidecar. Take a look inside. The deep cushions insulate the passenger from bumps in the road, and the sidecar often carried a spare tire, in case of a flat. Sidecars were popular in the early part of the century as an affordable alternative to the automobile. The other thing you'll notice looking at this bike is its stellar paint job. Here, Louis Netz, former vice president and director of styling, tells us more.
In order to attract sales, the company, from a graphic and paint standpoint, got into some really significantly exotic Art Deco, both colors and graphic designs. You can really see that and highlight that, and you look at the motorcycles of the 30s, the mid-30s, this influence of the company trying to attract different business.
The bike featured full braking power on all three wheels. The wheels were also designed to be detachable and interchangeable, so you didn't just look good piloting this streamlined beauty. You were prepared for whatever was around the next turn.
As motorcycles and motorcycle racing grew more and more popular, riders began to demand the performance and horsepower of a racing bike.
You know, racing has been a part of Harley Davidson since it started. It's a heritage.
Don Tilley is a dealer in Statesville, North Carolina.
It's what makes Harley Davidson. If you go back and look at any history way back, you'll see that Harley was racing no matter what.
In November of 1927, Harley Davidson announced the release of its first production two-cam motorcycle, known as the Two-Cam Twin. The cams were placed side by side, running each cylinder independently, which really improved performance. Previously, two-cam Harley-Davidson motorcycles were available only to race team members, hill climb competitors, and a very few select dealers.
Power and speed. Come in and compare these 1928 Harley-Davidson motors with the one in your old bus. See how much greater power and speed they give you. Their wonderful smoothness, quick pickup, and snappy getaway. Check over all the new 1928 motorcycle improvements. See what they mean to you.
Well, as told by Bill Davidson yesterday, we have the wall of tanks here, or tank wall, And in here, this kind of represents the dexterity, mastery of paint schemes and paint colors of Harley Davidson. This wall currently has 100 different tanks, and no two are alike. And these are from units that have been produced in the past. So this is pretty amazing, seeing how the company has kind of evolved throughout the years, checking out the different styles, fonts, color schemes, and stuff like that. And obviously matching the eras. I mean, you can easily tell some of the more modern designs versus some of the older, more classic designs, to the point of the Art Deco designs that we see here towards the front, which are some of the older styles that Harley Davidson used to have. So, pretty cool, if you ask me. Alright, guys.
This 1947 Cervicar model features elements developed specifically for police use, such as left-hand throttle controls and a bracket for holding the chalk stick. Motorcycles like this one were used by police in Milwaukee and around the country, mostly for parking enforcement. But one officer in Richmond, Virginia, used his solo Harley-Davidson motorcycle for something quite a bit more dramatic. On September 19, 1934, Officer J.R. Paul was leading a parade from the circus grounds in Richmond through the city streets. After just a few blocks, a lion broke loose and attacked one of the horses in the parade. Officer Paul and his Harley-Davidson solo model sprang into action. On the scene in a flash, Officer Paul fired but failed to kill the lion. It charged, and Officer Paul held him back with another shot. But his pistol was empty, and the lion was still on its feet. Officer Paul paused to reload, then pursued the lion into a field, where he shot him again. In the end, it was a group of circus employees who fired the definitive shot. Writing about Officer Paul and the events of that day, Harley-Davidson Enthusiast magazine announced, "The superior maneuverability and acceleration of his Harley-Davidson enables him to cope with situations in which automobile squads are helpless, as in this instance, when the street was crowded with circus equipment and people." In a melodramatic flourish, they conclude, "Otherwise, the lion might have tasted human flesh and blood."
In November of 1947, Harley-Davidson gathered together its dealers for a sales conference right here in Milwaukee. The 1948 Model S you see here was introduced at that event, but this wasn't any old conference. Committee Chairman William H. Davidson had a surprise in store. Take a look at the case in front of you. On the evening of the first day, guests were mysteriously directed to board a nearby 14-coach special train in downtown Milwaukee, which took them 45 minutes out of town in what had been billed as a secret destination run. The train emptied in a large structure where 1,000 chairs waited, and a band played "Hail, Hail, the Gang's All Here."
Hail, hail, the gang's all here.
After the crowd came to a hush, Davidson took the stage and briefly explained the ups and downs of the company through the Depression and into the war years. Then, he revealed his secret.
I cannot tell you how much pleasure it gives me to announce that this plant is now the property of the Harley-Davidson Motor Company.
The stunned crowd was silent, then burst into applause. And so Harley-Davidson's new Capitol Drive facility was revealed. The secret factory had been built for A.O. Smith Company during the latter days of the war for the production of B-29 Super Fortress bomber propellers. The war ended before any propellers were made. Harley-Davidson had purchased the 260,000 square foot facility for $1.5 million. A new era of Harley-Davidson production had begun. The secret factory, located 13 miles from here in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, proudly produced Harley Davidson motorcycles, powertrains, and performance parts for 6 decades. Today, the Capitol Drive facility operations have been combined into Pilgrim Road powertrain operations, a newer, larger facility in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, that manufactures powertrains for Sportster and Big Twin motorcycles. Tours of the Pilgrim Road facility are available through the museum year-round. Visit the Harley-Davidson Museum website or ask one of our museum team members for details.
Ho ho Harley Davidson. For those who feared that winter snow could keep them from riding, the company introduced its first snowmobile in 1970. It came with a 398cc engine and later a 440cc like the one you see here. It was solid, a plus for families who valued the stability of a touring snowmobile. Unfortunately, the snowmobile market wasn't very merry in the early 70s, a period with a lack of snowy winters. Sales weren't strong enough to justify continuing the project, and the company kept the focus on what it did best, making motorcycles. Be sure to check out the groovy Harley-Davidson threads to the right. Speaking of motorcycles, don't miss the Shortster here to your right, the smallest motorcycle ever built by Harley-Davidson. At just 126 pounds, it fit in the back of a station wagon. When the mini bike fad hit in the late 60s and early 70s, Harley-Davidson answered with the Shortster. Despite its small size, the Shortster packed more power than any other Mini on the market. When you think Harley-Davidson, you almost surely think motorcycle. But the company has put its technical and design expertise to work on a number of experiments over the years. Harley-Davidson and golf, for instance, aren't an obvious match. But in the 1960s, the Harley-Davidson golf car was the hit of the links.
We started building golf cars in 1962.
Tom Platz is a motorcycle conservator.
And if you look at the logo of our company, it says Harley-Davidson Motor Company. It does not say Harley-Davidson Motorcycle Company. And in the very early days of the company, there were over 150 domestic motorcycle manufacturers around. And the founding fathers had enough vision to make sure that they could easily diversify.
Over the years, as the company expanded, it became more diverse. Harley-Davidson bought the Tomahawk Boat Manufacturing Company in order to secure a fiberglass supplier. If you look up at the speedboat overhead, you can see Harley-Davidson's name on the Tomahawk label. Now walk over to the sporty red model to your right. The company also partnered with an Italian motorcycle company to become Air Macchi Harley-Davidson. The Italian plant produced a series of lightweight, single-cylinder motorcycles for the Harley-Davidson line, including the famous Sprint. Just one more landmark in a diverse heritage. A lot of you may know that the V-Rod was Harley-Davidson's first liquid-cooled production motorcycle. But actually, the top-secret Nova project was in the works years before the V-Rod motorcycle. You're looking at a pre-production prototype for the Nova, the revolutionary first liquid-cooled Harley-Davidson motorcycle. The design was achieved in collaboration with Porsche, but it never saw the light of day. Jeff Bluestein was on the Nova team and was chairman and CEO of the motor company from 1997 to 2004.
People sometimes say, well, how long did it take to do the V-Rod? And, you know, the short answer is, well, about 6 years, I think, from the time we really started developing that motorcycle and the engine until the time we put it into production. My answer is 26 years because I'm going back to when we first thought we need a liquid-cooled product line to supplement our air-cooled line, which goes back to the late 70s.
Nova, in my mind, could best be described as a motorcycle before its time.
Conservator Tom Platz remembers the Nova.
And were it not for the deep pockets of AMF from 1969 to 1981, the Nova project would have never happened. There is no way that Harley Davidson Motor Company in and of itself, without the merger with AMF, could have afforded that joint venture. And it probably led to AMF's making the decision to divest itself of Harley Davidson in 1981. They plunged millions and millions of dollars into the Nova project. We did have running prototypes. We did have test vehicles in the field for emissions requirements for the federal government. And we were close to putting it into production.
Though the Nova was close to going into production, the decision was made to shift resources to the production of the legendary Evolution engine, which was being developed simultaneously. Many credit this pivotal decision with helping secure the huge success of the company through the 90s. Elements of the Nova, including the fairing and the side-opening fiberglass saddlebags, survived in the 1983 FXRT Sport Glide model. In the late 40s and early 50s, the motorcycle industry experienced its own British invasion. Machines made by companies like BSA, Triumph, and Norton began appearing in the States. British bikes were lightweight and powerful, causing a stir in the market, particularly after Marlon Brando rode a Triumph in the movie The Wild One. Harley Davidson designers fought back with new sport motorcycle designs like the K model you see here and the Sportster model which followed. Step to your right now to the gold and white 1957 Sportster. Bill Jackson.
Harley Davidson came out with the Sportsters to respond to what was coming out of Europe and mainly England, and they just so absolutely nailed it in terms of the power that the engine could provide, with its overhead valve design. The low profile, it's very sporty, very nimble, but also just stunning to look at. Gorgeous to begin with. I mean, the two-tone paint, which was beautifully executed for 1950s standards.
Rider Cook Nielsen made the first road test of the 1971 FX Superglide model in Cycle magazine. Reflecting back on that first ride, he wrote,
"The bike was red, white, and blue. It was assertive, loud, self-absorbed, and audacious. And it was groundbreaking, not just for Harley Davidson, but for the entire biking industry."
The boldness of this design was in taking the style and culture of the street and bringing it back to the factory. Tom Platz explains how this patriotic 1971 Superglide model built on the past and laid the groundwork for the future.
The Superglide actually started the beginning of what we term today as the Boulevard Cruiser. It's the mating of a touring chassis with a sport front end. It retains the Fat Bob gas tanks, the instrumentation mounted on top of the gas tanks, the eyebrow over the front headlight, laced wheel on the front, laced wheel on the back, and Willy G. Davidson's signature fiberglass boattail seat and fender arrangement. It really laid the groundwork for the Superglide family, the lowrider, the wide glide, and the Sturgis. So this is really, the 71 Superglide is the grandfather of those vehicles, which have proved to be extremely popular for over decades now with the retail public, and really have become icons as to what that Boulevard Cruiser or street machine should look like.
The post-war years in America saw a boom of prosperity and productivity like never before. Motorcycle riding became more popular because thousands of veterans had ridden Harley-Davidson motorcycles in the service. Americans came together to have fun on bikes like this turquoise 1949 Hydroglide model.
It's always fair weather when good friends get together. on their Harley Davidsons, and you're always heading for fun when you hit the thrill trail to exciting race meets, hill climbs, and endurance runs, to delightful sightseeing trips and gypsy tours.
The bike you see here featured the first hydraulic suspension fork ever used on a Harley Davidson motorcycle. Engineers wanted to be sure that it wasn't only functional, but looked great too. World-famous industrial designer Brooks Stevens, designer of the Miller Brewing logo, Oscar Mayer Wienermobile, and many Studebakers, was chosen for the job. As you can see, it was a success. The improved handling offered by the hydraulic fork and the new, more powerful front brake in this 1949 FL made it even easier to drive carefully and responsibly. The American Motorcycle Association saw a surge in membership like never before, and an ever-improving highway system made traveling easy and fun. Clubs flourished around the country. In just a few years, hundreds of clubs appeared. They had names like the Flying Fleas Motorcycle Club of Memphis, Tennessee, the Courteous Patrol of Elkins, North Carolina, the Walnut City Squirrels of McMinnville, Oregon, and the Kankakee Nighthawks of Kankakee, Illinois. Though most were no girls allowed in the beginning, many groups soon admitted women and added ladies' auxiliaries. And some all-girl clubs formed as well, like the Romerettes of Springfield, Ohio, or the 13 Rebelettes Motorcycle Club of Los Angeles, California. Clubs participated in races and runs, spaghetti dinners, wiener roasts, and holiday parties, scavenger hunts, and dances. But they also held firmly to good motorcycle citizenship, swearing anti-noise muffler pledges, creating safety programs, and practicing in precision motorcycle drill teams. Did you know that there was a period when Harley Davidson almost ceased to exist? During the 1980s, the company came to the brink and charted a new path to independence. Watch the film in this next gallery to get the whole story.
Probably about the summer of '80 that it finally started to get through my head. The AMF really had changed their strategic direction.
Von Beals came to a number of us and said, we have an opportunity. This was in 1981.
I just got all the officers together and said, here's what the status is, here's the opportunity. I think there's a real possibility we can buy the whole bloody company for $1 to $2 million of equity.
I think we all jumped on the bandwagon when Vaughn said that we wanted to do this. Of course, we also all thought he was crazy.
After 12 years, Harley is breaking away from the giant AMF Corporation, a group including the grandson of one of the founders and exactly signed their fate in the last American motorcycle.
What they did was put in, for 13 people, put in the hat $1 million. And they borrowed about $90 million.
You remember the day when they announced that the Eagle Sword alone, I think was the motto. I think it was June either 14th or 15th in '81. That was a real cause for celebration within the organization.
We were so excited, the customers were so excited, our employees were so excited. I mean, it was just a huge thing for us.
After the initial euphoria wore off, and we started dealing with the bank debt and the high interest rates, and people forget that, the prime rate in the early 80s was 18 or 19%.
Yeah, I was probably one of the dumb ones. I didn't realize how risky it might turn out. It did turn out to be risky.
They proceeded to lose in the next 2 years $50 million. That's staggering for any company, but for somebody like Harley, it was utterly debilitating.
I don't think we
just how difficult life would be when the business got into some tough times and you had, four steely-eyed bankers looking at you and wanting to tell you exactly what to do.
And we had to make a lot of sacrifices. Everybody took a cut in pay, and there was some significant downsizing of the employee workforce.
There's about 1,080 members when I became president. Already in my second year, we're down to 480.
40% of Harley's employees are laid off. Its plants are operating at 50% capacity, and the company wants help. It's asking the International Trade Commission and the president to put temporary tariffs or quotas on the Japanese heavyweight bikes and engines.
Our driving force was to look at every manufacturing process and try and find all the waste in it, change that, and then do all kinds of rearranging and improving the process.
We played with paint and trim and seats and wheels and reflected on what we saw as the customer wanted.
It's been many, many years since we'd come out with a new engine, and we really needed something to help us compete against the Japanese and show that we were still state-of-the-art. We were thinking about our customers, and we could design it the best of them.
And they really believed that the Evolution project, which was under final phase of design at that time, was going to give enough reinforcement to the traditional line.
It took us a while to really understand that to make this thing a success, we were really going to have to get the dealers and the customers on our side. We were really going to have to reach out to them.
Hence the HOG program and the demo rides and executives at dealer open houses.
Well, things started turning around in little glimmers of hope, from time to time in different aspects of our business.
A new leadership style emerged, which was more collaborative and more cross-functional, more interdependent, and more open to different kinds of opinions.
The Evolution FXRTs down in front here. They represent for Harley the creation of a new motorcycle virtually from the ground up. Their engineering involved the latest use of advanced computer technology. They're manufactured with some of the most efficient manufacturing methods used in the United States.
We started changing the design of the motorcycle, and via a lot of conscientious hourly people working together and saying, hey, we're going to make it, we need to make it right. This is how we're going to do it. You start to see a change.
All of a sudden we could be a little bit more proud of what we were selling. We didn't feel like we had to apologize anymore for what we were selling. And that was really a wonderful feeling when we got to that point.
Harley Davidson is riding high these days. For the first time since 1980, America's last remaining motorcycle manufacturer posted a profit last year and regained its position as the premier maker of powerful heavyweight bikes called hogs. Despite the fact the market was looking good, really in a banker's eyes, it was looking good as the best time to get rid of this lone Harley Davidson.
Our lead lender, Citicorp, came to us and said, you've got to get more capital in here, or we're going to have to do something. Do something, of course, meant liquidate us.
Our conclusion was sometime, probably around September, that if we did not succeed in refinancing it by year end, that the game was over. We finally came upon this guy, Bob Coe, at Heller Financial, who was a Harley rider.
We had meetings with Heller, and it looked like in December, early December and around Christmas time, that we would have all of our prayers answered.
We got to New Year's Eve. 2 enormous stacks of documents. Recapitalization papers to get the deal done, and bankruptcy papers. Harley was ready to sign one or the other. And literally at about 11 o'clock on New Year's Eve, wires had finally cleared. A huge whoop went out in the conference room in this state bank we were sitting in. And these guys were throwing papers in the air.
I always say only in America can a company go from the threat of bankruptcy in December of 1985 to a public company on July 7th of 1986.
We would love to have stayed independent and not public, betraying banks to the stockholder. But we thought that the stockholder would be a much more friendly group than the original bank group.
So we did, and
magnificent day. It went public on the American Stock Exchange.
And there's no other company in the world that has the kind of devotion and loyalty that Harley Davidson does. I think it's a lifestyle. It's to be true to our customer, try to give them what they want. And some of it, I think, is still out there and a little bit in the street.
The bike you see here is a 1993 FLSTN, known by its nicknames the Cow Glide or Moo Glide because of its cowhide appointments and black and white two-tone paint. Only about 2,700 of these were built, and it has a very loyal following. Harley Davidson enthusiasts demonstrate their devotion to their bikes with an endless array of nicknames. Some, like Thumper, Bagger, or Bobber, are biker slang, an insider code that refers to mechanical or design qualities of the bikes. Others are pure flights of fancy. What nicknames have you heard for a Harley Davidson motorcycle? Lots of people refer to a Harley Davidson as a hog. One tradition says that in the 1920s, a group of farm boys started winning motorcycle races. They chose a piglet for their mascot, and every time they won, they would take the piglet on a victory lap. They became known as the Harley Hogs. In 1983, the company started an owners group called the Harley Owners Group, or HOG. Whatever you call it, the names writers give bikes reflect a passion for riding that goes beyond the practical. In the 1970s, Willy G. Davidson was given a dream project to design a new high-performance vehicle with no compromises and no budget limitations. The resulting motorcycle had an entirely new triangulated frame, cast aluminum front and rear wheels, a quarter fairing, and was painted all in black. Willy G. was inspired by a phenomenon that was little known here in the States, known as cafe racing. Across the pond in Britain, motorcyclists were riding from one truck stop or transport cafe to the other along the motorways. Motorcycle clubs like the Rockers and the Ton Up Club had a rock and roll attitude and wanted a fast, sporty cycle with their own individual stamp. Inevitably, some riders got the competitive spirit and would race to an agreed location and back, trying to beat a record before it finished playing on the jukebox.
Ready? Wait for it. Go!
Though the stripped-down, lean and mean racer look of the XLCR was eye-catching, most felt it was too dramatic of a departure from the styling trends of the time. To many, it also stood out as a symbol of the influence of parent company AMF. But this motorcycle is actually a testament to the massive research and development capital AMF pumped into Harley Davidson at the time. A lasting legacy of the Cafe Racer was the extensive quality auditing and road testing processes that were employed in its development. Today, the Cafe Racer is a highly collectible motorcycle with a strong cult following.
Did I make it?
Peter Simmet drove a 1971 GE Cervicar just like this one when he was a Milwaukee police officer in 1972.
Cervicars are a three-wheeled motorcycle. They're mainly used for we did parking enforcement, and we also handled all of the accidents. We had a trunk on the back. You carried a lot of extra equipment in there, flares, safety equipment, first aid tools, traffic cones, and all that to put out. One of the interesting things about the sirens on these bikes, when I first started on the department, the siren, you had a lever. And when you went down the road and you wanted the siren to go, you pulled a lever and it moved the siren so that it rubbed against the side of the front wheel. The faster you went and the harder you held the lever, the louder the siren blew. Sergeants were pretty understanding if it got to be 0 or below, then you could take a car out. But up till 0, you were expected to ride a motorcycle. And we did. We rode them year-round, no matter how much it snowed. Maybe once or twice they let us off the bike because of snow. We just rode. Rain, snow, ice, sleet, didn't matter. We rode.
To this day, motorcycle-mounted officers on the Milwaukee Police Department will ride in below freezing weather as long as the pavement is dry. Officer Simmet was working traffic control for President Gerald Ford's motorcade in Milwaukee.
We've got traffic cones up, and people are lining the sidewalks, you know, and here comes this guy. He didn't know what his problem was to start with, but he comes through the intersection, doesn't stop for the first officer, tries to stop him, doesn't stop for the second, gets to the barricades, hits the barricades, and drives out into the, like he's joining the motorcade. I and one of the other bikemen, we would jump on our bikes, we go after him, we get him pulled over. Secret Service comes running up, you know, they've got the machine guns, all think it's some guy intending to harm the president. Well, we get the guy out of the car, and he's just sloshed to the gills. I mean, he's just, the guy is like so drunk, and this is like 12, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. He's so drunk that he gets out of the car and he's like, what are all the people here for? And, you know, why do they have what's the parade all about? I mean, he just didn't even have any recognition as to what was going on. Here again, one of the advantages of being on a bike. You know, squads couldn't get on the street to stop him. The Secret Service, yeah, they're there to protect the president, but they have no equipment to, you know, go after this guy and stop him. And the bikemen, us being able to just hop on the motorcycles, we could just go through the crowds without any problem, and got right up to the guy and got him stopped and got him out of the motorcade.
June 3rd, 1974. Dear dealer, for months all of you have been reading about a new racing barn burner from Harley Davidson. The wins being posted in Europe on the new 250cc water-cooled road racer have been highly touted in the motorcycle press. We are now most pleased to advise that this unit will be raced in the U.S. at national events this summer by members of the Harley Davidson racing team. Best regards, Ron Edmondson, Motorcycle Snowmobile Sales Manager.
Even before it was released here in the U.S., the RR250 was burning up the track in Europe. In the 1974 Italian Grand Prix, driver Walter Villa won by 44 seconds over the second-place finisher. Even more astounding, he had been in 14th position only 3 laps earlier. This factory-built racing bike engine is quite rare. It's a water-cooled 2-stroke parallel twin built in the company's Aermacchi plant in Varese, Italy. Aeronautica Macchi, a famous Italian airplane manufacturer, started producing lightweight motorcycles after World War II. In the 1960s, Harley Davidson acquired a half interest in the company, hoping to produce a line of lightweight, inexpensive motorcycles for the American public. Together, the two companies formed Aermacchi. In 1972, the motor company made the pairing official, and Aermacchi became part of the Harley Davidson family. Aermacchi was a perfect fit, with an expertise in European-style scooters and cutting-edge research into electric bikes. In 1971, Harley-Davidson built the first factory custom motorcycle in the industry. 35 years later, the company designed the bike you see here to celebrate the Super Glide's 35th anniversary. Willy G. Davidson is the man behind this American classic.
I did a basic paint scheme on a white background with the red and blue symbols, red and blue stripes on the tank. So that was a very patriotic American-style paint scheme that was iconic.
Willie says the paint job is just one element that goes into the design of a Harley-Davidson motorcycle.
They're meant to be looked at. The proportions of wheel to fenders to fuel tank, all of those shapes have to work in concert. And I think you adhere to certain rules that you feel strongly about as a designer, but yet you can modify and update and add technical features which will, I think, create new and different variations on the theme.
The original Super Glide and the 35th Anniversary Edition models share little in terms of technology, but a lot in terms of styling and spirit. Both bikes deliver classic style, speed, superior handling, and an exceptionally smooth ride with just a little bit of vibration at higher speeds, a quality many Harley-Davidson enthusiasts insist on. As one Harley-Davidson engineer said, "We haven't changed anything, but we changed everything."
Well, all good things come to an end, boys and girls. Behind me is the museum where it all started yesterday. Today we finished. I had a great time. To summarize what we did is yesterday we got here early in the morning, did a little touring of the museum, yada yada yada. Then all of a sudden we had a bunch of big wigs show up, from vice presidents to Bill Davidson himself, where we kind of talked for a while bikes, and they talked about what I did, and I said I did nothing important, but they seem to think I did, which is pretty awesome now that I think about it. And he himself, he's the museum curator, you can say. He's like the guy who knows everything about anything in the museum. And he took me to some of the stuff that nobody else normally gets to see. He gave me data or information behind the scenes about some of the exhibits. And once he left, I continued with some of the vice presidents. We talked some more about LiveWire, future stuff, what's going on, what's cooking. Kind of rebuilt a relationship, gave them some of the feedback you guys have given me. I provided that information to them. They're going over it right now and seeing what they can and can't answer. Obviously, there's a lot of secrecy now. New management, new CEO, which, by the way, he's a Harley LiveWire writer. He's part of the group, which is pretty awesome, if you ask me. He is now, they are looking at the data, and we'll see what we get out of him. As for future developments, I'm sorry to say there's not much I can say. That's all I can say for right now, except there's a pretty blue color floating around now, so take that for whatever it's worth. But other than that, Harley Davidson right now, I could tell you that Effie is strong. Or in the words of Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is on the air right now, the force is strong on Effie here. So no need to worry. I just saw a message from one of the people on our forum, Mac Mike, which is a very knowledgeable guy. There's some special 0.99% financing on LiveWires now with 2,000 down. So if you're seriously thinking about a LiveWire, I think this is the moment to get a deal on one. Plus whatever other federal and tax incentives, and if you're in the state of California, you get some additional state incentives. You might be able to get a good deal on one. Sub 30,000, way below that. So I think you should look at it or look for it if you're really interested in it. But no, this is great. It's been a great opportunity to meet some of the people who've been supporting us, me and you guys, because obviously I would not have created the forum, the group, and the page and done what I'm doing if I didn't have the backing of the guys here at engineering, technical services, so on and so forth, doing what they do for us. So till the next one, guys, hope you enjoyed everything you saw. It was a pleasure hanging out with you guys, taking you guys through the museum. I made sure that I hit every single exhibit that had some sort of voiceover so you guys could listen to what I was listening to, and just focused on that. So till the next one, guys, stay strong, ride safe. Make sure that you're active in the forum. It'll mean a lot to them, because one of the things that I told them is that look at the forum, look at the page, look at the group, and you'll get some vitals on what people are saying about the bike, what they like and dislike before anywhere else. And they took that. I mean, they're real receptive of what I said. So, guys, ciao, till the next one.